Hello everybody, what is going on? My name is the Dizzy Viper and welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial I'm gonna be showing you how to make motion stills. And I know what you think. Hey, you already did a motion stills tutorial. Yes, I did, that is true, and you can watch that video right here. But the technique that I showed in that tutorial only works in certain situations. And I also only found out later. So, the situations that technique does not work is if you're using it together with the Octane scatter. And the technique that we used in the other tutorial, by the way, just in case you don't want to go back and rewatch it, instead of moving the car and the camera, we left the car and the camera still and only moved the scene. But if you do that, all the scattered objects on your Octane scatter will not blur. They will be steady. So to fix that, obviously what you have to do is do what real life does and move the car and the camera. And we're gonna do that right now. And later on, after I'm done explaining how all that works, I'm gonna do a small scene breakdown of this image sliding. Because on my Instagram page, a lot of people have been asking me how I get such a crisp lighting on it. And I do think that there are some small little details that I can explain that will make the renders look a lot better. So without any further ado, let's get right into Cinema 4D. So right now I'm just gonna import a car model. I don't know which one yet. I'm probably gonna just use a, I don't know, Lamborghini or something. Let's use a Lamborghini Huracan. There we go. Where's my? There it is. I always have a Octane optimized version on it. There we go. So that is our Lamborghini Huracan right there. And yes, it does have windows. I just deactivated them from the viewport, so I can also change materials inside the car without having to go inside the car all the time, if you know what I mean. Next, I'm just gonna make a really small scene, like just a street, and some reference objects so you can see the movement. Alright, so I just realized instead of making the reference objects, I should actually just use the Octane scatter, because that's why I'm actually making the tutorial. So let's just use the Octane scatter with some forest or plants. Just gonna make like a side plane like that, like a little tilted, nothing too crazy. Just to scatter the buildings, the plants on. The buildings, yeah. Now let's open Forester. I'm just gonna use, which trees I think I'm always using, which buildings do I use? Let's use something maybe not too heavy, maybe, let's see. Let's use this one. This one is actually not too crazy. It is quite heavy if you use all the render levels, which we're gonna do now, but it's much less heavy than the needle trees. So let's see if we can find an eligible scale for this. Yeah, let's do it like that. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly import my custom grass and leaves shader, which is essentially just a really simple grass shader that I made. There is also a tutorial about that on my channel if you want to see it, and you can look at it right here. Very simple to make, very super cool to look at. Okay, now let's put it into an Octane scatter, right here. Put that tree in there. Let's set the distribution to surface, and then the count, let's do 10 for now, because I don't know how much they spread, and I don't want to crash my computer, because I think if I would have left it on 1000, now there would be 1000 trees on this small plane, and that would be a little too much for my little delicate machine, I guess. Alright, so let's put that on here, and what you will notice if you do it like that, the trees are not straight, they are tilted, and that is because the plane is tilted. And normally, if you, for example, use a landscape, you can just decrease this normal align value and they will all stay straight up and will not be tilted anymore. But since this plane is tilted on its axis already, this will not work. So what you have to do is the following. Set the normal align to 0. And now here you have a small setting called up vector, and it has 3 fields. Each field is for one axis. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna set the first one to 1. And what that does is, as you can see, it tilts the trees into the other direction, which is obviously also not right. But now you can correct that using the normal line slider by just sliding it towards 1 until all the trees are straight. Just like that. Okay, now we can slowly increase the number of trees so everything is covered. I'm gonna go for maybe 150. That's way too much actually. Let's go for 70. That's about it. Yeah, 70 is fine. 70 is okay. Yeah. Let's also put the car a little over here so we have a little more distance from those trees. Alright, so we got that. I'm not gonna use a grass texture or grass. Well, you know what? Actually, you know what? Let's go full ham on this and just use actual grass for this, since we're gonna do that right now. Let's go. Another Octane scatter, another forester, and I'm gonna use 2 different grass types. I'm gonna use grass patch, and I'm gonna use which one? POA grass. Those 2 are my favorites. Now I'm just gonna alt drag all these materials over the existing forester materials to replace them, just like this. And I'm gonna go with the bright one right here, like that, and like that. And I'm gonna delete the other ones. Now, if you plan on still using forester, like on still creating new plants in your project, I recommend not using this setting for now, because as you can see down here, we have some gray forester textures, and if you delete those, the next forester objects you will load will most likely have half of the textures missing. And I do not know why exactly that is, but it is a common problem, so make sure you have all your plants in your scene before you use the remove unused materials option. Alright. Right. They are a little too big actually, those grass. Maybe let's just scale down the POA grass. So it's a little like that, and this one a little smaller, just like that. Put that into our Octane scatter again, and then put the plane in here. And now here I think we'll have to use a much higher count, maybe like 5,000. Let's try that. Yeah, that's about it. For now, I'm not gonna use a texture under the grass, but if you want to make your render look really good, make sure you always use a displacement texture of dirt, earth, I don't know, sand, mud, something like that, under your grass to make it look better, because you have to think that the grass also reflects the ground under it, and that makes a lot of difference in the look. Alright, so now let's go to the motion blur. Okay, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna first create an Octane camera, and then we just adjust the camera the way that we want it. So in my case, I'm gonna use a focal length of 55, go put the camera a little to the back, and make the camera slightly just like this, something like that. Yeah, that looks fine actually. Okay, so now we're gonna put those 2 objects into a null. So our hurricane or the car, and our object and our Octane camera. So we're gonna select the 2 with Control and click, and then we're gonna press Alt G to group those. It creates a null around those 2. What we're gonna do, we're gonna create a keyframe right here on frame 0, like that, and then we're gonna go to frame 2, not frame 1, frame 2, and just move the car a little forward. It doesn't have to be too much, just like that, and create another keyframe. Now we select both the keyframes, hit right click, and hit linear. What that does is, instead of giving us a spline animation, a spline curve, it gives us a linear curve, and that is just a straightforward movement. So now we select frame 1, which is the frame in between those 2. And the reason why we did this now is, on frame 0, the car does not move. On frame 2, the car does not move. The only frame the car moves at is frame 1. Because if we now used frame 0 and frame 2, what would happen is that there would be no motion blur because there is no motion to blur. So we're gonna use frame 1. So now inside your Octane camera settings, you will see that there is a motion blur tab. You just hit enable and leave the shutter at 0 for now. Next, we're gonna create an object tag on our hurricane. And you're gonna do that by right clicking on your object, Cinema 4D Octane tags, and Octane object tag, just like that. There is no setting you have to do in this for now. And what that does is, since our camera is moving with the hurricane, if you don't have this object tag on the model, the Huracan will blur too, because the Huracan is moving. But since you put the object tag on the Huracan, the object tag tells the Octane camera, wait, we're moving at the same speed. You don't have to blur me. Let's actually just move this plane a little further away, because it looks weird if it just ends like that. Just like that. It still ends, but it's much better. Okay. Now, what we're gonna do is go back into our Octane camera setting and just put in a value like 0.005 of our shutter speed. And as you can see, we got a motion blur. But I know what you're thinking. Wait a second, the car is motion blurred as well. Yes, and that is a problem I have always been experiencing with Octane motion blur. This motion blur will not be there when you render into picture viewer. So if the car gets blurry in your live viewer, don't worry, that is only in the live viewer. But if you want to fix that, in the live viewer, what you do is just go back and forth a couple of times until it works. Look like this. Forth, back, back, like that. Maybe go back. Maybe go out of the camera, go back in. And there you have it. As you can see, now the trees in the background are blurred. Let's actually put a higher value here so they get blurred a little more. Okay. So as you can see, our trees are blurred now and the car is not blurred. It's a little buggy, as I said, with the keyframes, but what you have to do is just go back and forth, maybe leave the camera, but go back into it, and that will fix it sometimes. But you have to do that every time you change something. So what I do usually while working, I usually just keep the motion blur for the car on all the time, because there are no very small minor details on the car that I need to worry about while working on motion blur. And now we come to the wheel motion blur, which is a real pain in the butt sometimes. And that is, if you have a good model, for example from Hum3D, they sell amazing models, the wheels are centered perfectly, meaning that your wheel axis is in the dead center of the wheel. And then motion blur with wheels works perfectly. But if you do it yourself, and you are not very good at centering stuff, just like me, what will happen? The slightest millimeter, nanometer of offset of your axis on the wheel will cause the whole wheel to get blurry and mushy and vibraty. And that is not very beautiful. So if you want to see how to make wheel motion blur inside Octane, just like that, I would like to redirect you to the other motion stills tutorial that I made. There will be a link in the description to it down below, and I would like you to watch that. But in here, I'm gonna leave the wheel steady like this, and we're gonna add the wheel motion blur later in Photoshop. So yeah, that's pretty much all that we do in Cinema 4D. And now we're gonna go into Photoshop and add a wheel motion blur to that. So now we're in Photoshop. I know what you're thinking. Hey man, you just screenshotted the screen. Yeah, I know. I just thought it would be way quicker than just rendering the whole thing. But it does its job, and we're gonna add motion blur right now. So the way you do this, I'm sorry I have Photoshop in German, but I will definitely explain how like the names of everything. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna first select one wheel with your pen tool, just like that. And I have the soft edges set to 1 pixel, so it's a little softer. Alright, so now you have your wheel selected, and up in here you go to filter, and then you will have a setting called blur gallery, and in there should be an option called radial blur. And you go into that and you will see you get this circular menu right here, and you put your center of this blur into the center of the wheel, just like that. And now the only thing that I don't like about this is that you can't, as you can see, I can't scale this much more down than this. And I don't know why that is, but essentially what I then tend to do is I just create the shape of my wheel with this tool just bigger. And if you're using like 4K or 6K, 8K resolution, this is not a problem, because then the wheel obviously is bigger in resolution. But if you use small resolutions, for example, this right here is 1000 by 1000, this can be a little of a problem. But here I'm now gonna slightly I'm trying to create the shape of the wheel just like that by eye. It's not something you have to be extremely precise with. So we're gonna have it like that and click OK. And now we're gonna do the same thing for the other wheel in the back, just like that. There we go. Now our wheels are blurred and the car looks like it's driving. So now let's go into the Chiron scene that I talked about earlier and make a little scene breakdown of that, because I think there are some really simple tricks in that can make the render look a lot better. So here we are in the Chiron scene. As you can see, the wheels are also not blurred, and that is because I used the same technique as I just showed you inside Photoshop. Okay, so before I will go into lighting in this scene, I want to point out something very important with renders like this. So as you can see, everything the camera sees is behind the car, let's say, like all the trees, all the rocks, all the grass, and the mountain or the hill is behind the car. But what I've seen quite some people forget is everything reflects in the car, meaning that if you have nothing behind the camera, like let's say another like scattered trees or something like that, there will be no reflection of them in the car and it looks a little weird. As you can see, we have a reflection of trees and rocks and stuff in the car. And you simply do that by just creating a really simple, very, as you can see, the texture is not really good and everything. Just some trees and some texture, like as you can see, it doesn't really have to be really good. And what that does, it first of all creates shadows, because the lighting is always coming, and at least in my renders, the lighting is always coming from like behind the camera or behind the car, and that creates shadows, and it also creates reflections on the car, which obviously they should be there, except maybe there is like it's going downhill right there. But depending on what you want your scene to look like or be the illusion of the scene, you have to think that there is something behind the camera as well, and you have to add that to get the right reflections. So now for the lighting, what I used is I just used a simple Octane daylight. As you can see, if we go into the camera tag, I used a much less saturated blue for the sky and a much less saturated orange for the sun. And then what I also did is I used a small fog volume with a high edge feather, and that is just to prevent like you actually seeing where the fog volume starts and where it ends. As you can see, the fog volume is actually quite large and not that small, but it's not covering the whole scene. That's what I mean. As you can see, it's just covering a little bit more than what the camera can see. And obviously, if you're using huge fog volumes, make sure to up in your voxel size almost to the max. As you can see, my fog volume is 10,000 by 10,000 by 7,500, and I used a voxel size of 1,000, which makes it work. And then in my medium tab, what I used here is a very low density and an RGB spectrum with a very subtle yellow color, as well as in your scattering settings a value of 0.6. That's just for this scene. And what a scattering value does is it essentially just scatters the light inside of the fog volume more towards the light source, if that makes sense. So basically you can create, like, as you can see up here, these shining little spots right here if you up in your scattering phase a little bit. And again, back into the Octane daylight. Since we're using a fog volume, the scene can get a little bit darker. So what I used is, first of all, a higher power. As you can see, 3.3 is very high. And then also a high sky turbidity. And the reason I did that is because obviously when the sun shines through a fog volume, it's not gonna be the sharpest sun anymore. Like, it's not gonna trace extremely sharp edges, except you're gonna use a sun size of 0, which then again is a little unrealistic regarding the scene. And now, last but not least, where is the sun? The sun is right here somewhere here. I don't exactly know because it's so bright. But it's somewhere around here, basically shining from about here. And the reason I do that is because then, first of all, you get, like, as you can see, like these shadows down here from the trees because the sun shines through it. Then you get nice reflections on the windows and in the back, like all these small little cool highlights. And that is the main reason why I do this, as well as maybe in the back, as you can see, like these small bright spots from the sun and from the fog right here. And I think it looks a lot nicer when the sun comes from either behind your object, or like behind, I mean like here, or behind your camera, depending on your scene. But yeah, that is all I do. As you can see, what a lot of people surprised is actually I did not use an HDRI at all. But that is mainly because the whole scene is covered in trees, so you don't see the sky anyways. But even then, I really rarely use Octane HDRIs. And then, if I use them, I usually just render without background. So I get a PNG without a sky, and then I add a better sky texture in Photoshop. But yeah, that's pretty much all for this tutorial. If you enjoyed the tutorial, if it helped you, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you have any further questions, just ask in the comment section down below and I will be happy to answer them. With that being said, I hope you all have a very nice day and peace out.